For 2 years now, we are regularly visited by ravens around 4 or 5 in the afternoon, who have become used to getting a bit of food, mostly dog kibbles, which they prefer over bread. Occasionally I can supplement their supplies by a roadkill rabbit. Usually within hours the rabbit disappears, without more of a trace than a few tufts of wool. This always puzzled me. I did not believe the ravens could clean up the table like that. I did not believe the vultures were capable of it either. It looked like the carcass was carried off. But who did that? Was it dogs, raccoons, bears, cougars, eagles? Because I usually put the carcass out in the evening, I was unable to record what happened or how it disappeared. So when the opportunity presented itself to obtain a rabbit carcass in the morning, I jumped at the possibility of recording the subsequent events during daylight. The rabbit was put out at 8 a.m. and I started recording continuously. Nothing much happened until 2 hours after the rabbit had been put out. At this time, a turkey vulture arrived and started feeding with difficulty, concentrating on the entrails as I had cut the belly cavity of the rabbit open. 5 minutes later, a second vulture arrived, which immediately resulted in an altercation between the two vultures, which seems to have been won by the second arrival. One vulture, it may have been the second arrival, removed the rabbit some 2 to 3 meters and continued to defend the rabbit against the other vulture. I walked up to the camera and decided that the settings were appropriate and the vultures tolerated my coming and going. Then, some 5 minutes later, after the first vulture arrived, both vultures show briefly a sign of fright, as if some threat appeared above them. Could an eagle have been passed over? Shortly after, both vultures alighted on a branch above the rabbit, about a minute apart. Then, half a minute later, one of the vultures left. It might have been the loser in the contest over the rabbit. The one that left had alighted at the outside of the branch with less protection from overhanging branches. Then nothing more happened for about 40 minutes. At that time, I started another video which would provide the answer to my question. 40 seconds after starting the video, a raven appeared from the tree above, with another following a few seconds later. The first one arriving looks a tad larger than the second one, which might mean that the male arrived first and the female second. They both were tearing at the carcass in opposite directions, to and fro, feeding on the entrails as well. Not even a minute later, one of them, I think the female, disappeared into the forest, only to appear again within half a minute. Then the presumed male took off with a large chunk of something. Now the other, presumably the female, started feeding in earnest. At this time, 3 minutes into the current video, I went out to adjust the camera, increasing the telesetting of the zoom lens to better capture the details. Now the rabbit appeared still largely intact. The ravens went vigorously at it and tore huge chunks out of it. After about a minute of effort, one of them, I think it was the male, managed to sever the head of the rabbit from the body and took off with it. Half a minute later a vulture appeared, but was quickly chased off by the raven who had taken the head away. The raven pulled the vulture at its tail. After 2 rounds of tail pulling, the vulture was driven off. Both ravens now continued to feed vigorously for another 3 minutes, when they became attentive and alert and flew off. Immediately one could hear the ferocious alarm cries which they reserve for raptors, eagles, red-tailed hawks, and even the much smaller Cooper's hawks, but which they never use for vultures. And then, very swiftly, something swooped down, grabbed the rabbit, and took off with it. Single-frame capture showed that it was a red-tailed hawk. So the riddle of how the rabbits disappear without a trace is solved. Raptors, take it away.